What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today's video we're going to set up phone authentication. So what that means is a user will be able to log into our app with just their phone number. Let me show you real quick how it's going to work by the end of this. So in the app here on my actual device, you're going to see we now have this sign in with phone option. If you click on that, you're going to have the option to enter your phone number. You'll see this can be done with any area code and it will validate that area code. So if I type in my phone number, before I hit continue, if I were to change the area code, which this is no longer an accurate area code, you'll see it does warn me that my phone number is not valid. If I change it back to the US, which this is now a valid phone number, and hit continue, Firebase is actually going to go ahead and verify that I'm not a robot. And once that's verified, it's going to ask me for the text verification code, which you saw just came through. So if I put that text verification code in and hit submit, it's going to log me into the app. All right, let's get started. All right, so in our sign up view file here, we want to add another button down below here. That'll be sign in with phone. So we can find where our sign in buttons are, which are kind of towards the bottom, I believe. You can see this is the Google sign in button. So below the Google sign in button, we can add another button. And this is actually, we're just going to be building it as a custom button. So for that, we can use a raised button. Then we can set the color of this to be green and the text color to be white. Then we want the button to have an icon similar to the Google one. So to do that, we're going to actually need to use a row here for the child. So within the row, we can then have the two widgets. One will be an icon, and that's going to be icon of phone. And then after that, we can use actually the text. And we can just set that to be sign in with phone. So if you save that, you'll see it comes up down here. There are some issues here. The color is not being set. Well, actually the main problem is the color isn't being set because the button is just disabled. So we need to also add the on pressed. And for right now, we can just leave this blank. But if you save that now, the button will be green. There's some padding we can add here around this text. And to the left, we'll do 14. And then on the top and the bottom, we can do 10. Then we're also going to want to increase the font size of this. So set that equal to 18, and then it should match the Google one more closely. So that looks good. So now with our on pressed here, what we want to do is actually just change the state of our page. So this is where our current setup for how our sign-in works. If you're just joining in on this video, go back and look at some of those other videos and it'll show you kind of how all of this is working. The main thing is you'll notice if we're in the sign in state right here, you see we have email and password. If we go to the create new account, we're really just changing the state of this page to be the new account form here. And then same thing with the forgot password, that's just a different state. So we're going to add another state for the phone auth. So when we click this button, we're going to change that state to basically, it'll be a lot like the forgot password. It's just going to have one field here. So let's create that state. Go all the way back up to the top and you'll see these are our states right here, the auth form type. So we're going to add a new state called phone. And now we can kind of go through and all these variables to change based on this phone state. So really when we click that button, we want to set the state to be phone. So we can do that pretty easily with set state here. And then we're going to do the auth form type, which is another variable we already have set. And this is what is determining the state of this form. And then we can set that equal to the phone type that we just created. So if you save this now and you click on the button, a lot of the defaults of this are for the create new account, I believe. So if you click this, it is going to set some of those defaults to the create new account, but you'll notice not everything changed and it's pretty much not how we want it at all for this. So let's go through and actually set those states specifically for the phone. So let's go all the way back up to the top and we'll just kind of go through it. So the first thing we can see here is in our submit function that we have created, we're now getting an error here because we do have that new auth form state type that is actually not set up here. So it's pretty easy to change this. We just add another case and we'll say when it is the phone type. Now this submit right here, this function is basically defining what this button is going to do. Because we're using this kind of a stateful, we're reusing a lot of the same elements and we're just changing what they're doing and what they're labeled as. So this button we can change the text of in a second, but basically when we're in the state of the phone, what we want to do when that phone button is clicked is what we're going to put right here. So this is going to be done in a second. So it'll be just the submit action. So now let's actually find where this form is created and the title. This is build the header text. So that's what's going to actually set this right here. So we just need to add in another else if here. So we could end that and then say else if, and we're going to be checking if that auth form type equals the auth form type of phone. And then if it does, we're going to set this header text state to be equal to phone sign in. And if you save that, you see it updates right there with the hot reload. Next, we can find where these forms are set. And that's right here in the build inputs. And this, if you remember, we have a list that we're basically, depending on the state, we're going to add a few elements to that list, and then that list is going to get displayed. So this email field here has always been here regardless of the state. So we're going to need to actually wrap this in an if statement similar to the other blocks in here. And we can do this pretty simply. We can leave it where it is and just wrap this in an if statement. Now we're going to change this. So the states when we want the email are going to be sign up, convert, as well as the reset. So we can add the auth form type of reset. It should be there for the sign in as well. So sign in, reset, convert, and sign up should all have the email. And if we go back here and look, we can look, this is the sign up, so that still looks good. If we do create a new account, email is there, which looks good. And then if we do forgot password, that is there as well, which looks good. The convert is when we're logged in and we try and convert to a new user. So that would be similar to that's pretty much similar to the sign up page, but in a way this should do that. So you'll notice the password is still showing up here. The way we're excluding the password now is we're basically showing it for everything that isn't the reset. So we're going to need to change this a little bit. And I mean, there's a few ways you can do this, but we're just going to add an and here and essentially say if the auth form type is not reset and if the auth form type is not phone, then we'll show it there. I mean, you could do this. Logic is pretty simple. There's different ways you can do it. Obviously you could say explicitly which ones you do want to show it for, but either way, now we're at this point, we don't have anything showing, so we just need to add one new text field. We can put this text field block in here. Actually, it might be a little bit easier to read. And then we'll copy that whole block and we'll modify it. So this is basically going to be if the auth form type is equal to phone. So then we can add that new field. And if we were to just put a field here, we're not going to validate it with a validator that we're going to create. Instead of password, we could say enter phone. We don't need to obscure text because it's not going to be a password. And the on save, we're going to need a new variable here, which we can call phone. And let's go ahead and define that real quick. If you scroll back up towards the top, we define all of those string variables right here. So now we can use this basically to store the user's input. Let's see, so here we are. With this, if we save this, now you'll see the phone number field is there. So that looks good. We're going to come back to this and actually modify it so that we get the area code in front of it, but let's finish the rest of this page based on the state. So next we can find the build buttons function, which is where which is actually where these two buttons are being set, the text of them. The switch button text is going to be essentially the secondary text button down here, which will switch you to another state. And then we also have that new form state, which is actually going to be the form state that we're switching to. And then the submit button text is just that main text there. So if we copy all of this as well and paste it right there, we can start modifying it. So if the type is phone again, the switch button text, which is going to be the one on the bottom, that can read cancel. And if we are canceling that, we can just go to the sign in page, which is essentially like reverting back to where we were. And then this main one here can say continue. So if we update that, you'll see it says enter phone and then continue. The other thing is we don't want to show any of these buttons below if we're on this state. So to do that, we already basically have it set up. You can just set show social to false. So if you save that, that looks good there. So if you hit cancel, you'll go back to the sign in page. If you do the phone, you're looking good at this point. So now we want to set it so that we can enter the phone number. All right, so with Firebase Auth and phone numbers, it's really important that we get the area code. So when we're passing the phone number to Firebase Auth, it needs to have, if we're in the US, that +1 at the beginning. And if you're in any other country, it's going to need to have that plus and then the area code. If it doesn't, your authentication with phone is not going to work at all. Instead of making the user enter +1 here, like this, and then entering their phone, which is not a good user experience because no one's really going to know to do that, we're going to use this plugin called International Phone Input, and it's going to give us this nice drop down where the user can just choose their phone number, and then it has an added benefit of basically validating that phone number for that country. So if we choose the US as the country code and then we type in a phone number that doesn't validate to a US phone number, it's not going to actually validate that phone number. We can use that to put some notices in so that we don't even try to validate it with Firebase, and instead we'll just tell the user they need to enter a valid phone number. So let's add this package to our project. It's pretty simple. Just take this dependency here and go to our pubspec.yaml, and we'll add it in right there, and then pub get. And then if we go back, we can actually grab this import here and just put that up at the top of this file. And now we can go to where our text field is. So we're going to comment out what we have so far, but make sure you keep it inside this textfields.add. So then we're going to get their example here in the README part, and they have two different examples. If you get the one with the decoration, that's what we're going to want, because we want the background to look similar to this, that white background. So if you paste that here, there's a few things we can change here. Decoration, first off, is we do have our build sign up input decoration, and we could put that right here in place of that. And let's actually add a number here. Then the on phone number changed, we're going to need to create a function for this, and they actually already in the README basically have that written. So let's go ahead and find that, which is right here. So we can put this, we're going to want to go above our build inputs function. You can put it essentially anywhere in this file. I'll do it right above that. And what this is basically doing is each time you enter a character in this text field, it's going to pass in these values, and you can set a state. So we do have that phone variable that we already set above, and we're going to want to set that to the internationalized phone number. If we're also going to let me print that out so we can see it. If you print the internationalized phone number, this one will include the +1 if it's the US, or it's going to include that area code. If you just print the number, it's not going to include that +1. And then the iOS code is going to be the country code related to that, but we don't really need that for this. But this right here is going to be what we need. So back down in that function there, our initial phone number we can set to we can set this to an empty string, or you can set it to phone. I'll set it to the phone, which is going to be an empty string. the initial selection, this we're going to set to the US. So that this is basically telling you what is the default country code that you want it at. Enabled countries, this gives you the option to pretty much specify just a few countries if you want. We're not going to include this. We're going to allow every country. And then showing country codes as false is basically only going to show the flags if it's false. So if you make that true, it will show both. So if you save this, you'll see now we have this cool drop down here with all the country codes, and it is defaulted to the US, but you could choose any from this list. If you start typing a number, you'll notice there's some errors here. We actually, once this is installed, you actually need to stop your app and then rerun it. This is something that I spent a good bit of time trying to debug. It just needs to be reset, essentially. All right, so when it loads back up, we can click the sign in with phone again. And now if we start typing, you'll notice we're getting these blank print statements here. And this is actually from our print line right here. So the reason it's blank is because this function here, which is part of that package that we installed, is actually going to validate that phone number right within this. So since 804 is not a valid US phone number, it's not actually setting this variable to the phone number. It's just going to keep it as blank. So if you continue to add the number until it's valid, you'll see then the phone number is actually printed. I believe the validation is really only based on length, but I'm not 100% certain on that. Either way, this is like a test phone number that we're going to be using for now, but you'll see once that's set in there, we do get that number down here. So essentially our phone variable here, which is what we could have been printing, is going to be set to this. So that's good. Now our form is set up. Now we need to set up our continue button and have this action, when we click it, pass this phone variable into Firebase and create that user account. So we can find where we put that comment to do up here, and this is where we can start making some modifications. So this is what's going to happen when that button is clicked. If you do just print out anything here, and if you save it and hit continue, you'll see when this button is clicked, this is where the action is set up for that. So with this, let's first do a quick check before we set up the function. We're going to check to make sure that that phone value right here is valid. And we're going to know it's valid if the phone variable, the underscore phone variable, has a value, because this value is only going to get set if that phone number was valid. So this is a quick check that we can do, and it's basically going to give us that warning, which we did already set up warnings. Like down here, you can see we have the warning set up to the error message. So we're essentially going to do the same thing, but we're going to do it explicitly in here outside, because this is not going to be caught in this catch block. So anyway, just a quick if statement here, and we can say if phone is equal to an empty string, then we're going to, and you can copy this pretty much, we're going to set the state, and let's delete that. We're going to set the state of this warning to equal the string your phone number could not be validated, and add the breakdown here as well, since we're inside this case. Now if we save this, and if we cancel and click on phone, actually change the phone so it's no longer valid, and then hit continue, you'll see we get that nice validation error message right there. So the next thing to do is actually set up that function for Firebase. That is going to be an asynchronous function. So we can also have this function return an error, and if that function does return an error, we can also just put this validation message. So let's call the result of this function that we didn't create yet result, and then right here is where we're going to call that Firebase function. So we're going to have to await it because we know it's going to be asynchronous, and then similar to how we're calling any of our other functions, we're going to put it in our auth class. So let's just call it with auth, and we do need to create this in the auth class, but we can name whatever we want to call the function right here. So we'll call it create user with phone. And this is erroring because we did not create that function yet. So let's actually go ahead and create this function, and then we'll come back and update the error message there. So in our services, we have our auth service, and this is where our other auth login services are. So we also have validation at the bottom, so make sure you are in the actual auth service class right here, and then we'll add this in the bottom, but this will be a future. This will return a future, and it's going to be that new function name that we just created. And now there's that function. So if we go back here, you'll see that error is gone now. We are going to need to pass in that phone variable, which is this phone variable. So it's that string value of the phone number. And again, this is going to include the area code already because of the way that we're saving this. We need to have this accept a string parameter, and we'll call it phone. So now we can use this phone within our function here to create that user in Firebase. So we already have an instance within this class of Firebase Auth, so we can use that right here. And we can call verify phone number on our instance of Firebase Auth, and this is a function that is part of the Firebase Auth package, which you should already have installed in a previous, if you were following along with the previous videos. If you don't, you can find out how to do that in previous videos. And then we have all of these variables that are available for us to pass in. And actually, really the only variable is the phone number, and then these are all callbacks. So essentially these are going to do different things based on how the verification went. So the phone number here, we're going to pass as that phone number that we're passing in. So again, this is going to be that string phone number, including the area code. The timeout here is going to be how long we're going to give it to auto complete this phone verification. So the way this phone verification will work is it does have the potential to not require the code that's going to be texted to you, or rather, not that it won't require it, but that the phone has the capability of auto detecting that value and then auto verifying that it is the phone that you're on. So the timeout value here, while you're testing, you're going to want to set this to a pretty low value because you want this to time out pretty quickly so that the pop-up will come up to have you enter that verification code you'll get in your text message. So this is going to be a type of duration, which is basically just a way to set time. So in seconds, we can do 10 seconds here. And then verification completed. This is kind of what I was just describing. This is going to be what's called if it can auto detect that and basically auto complete the request. I haven't really had any luck with it auto completing that, and I don't know if maybe it's just an Android thing, but basically I'm just going to leave this as null because I'm going to always require the code to be sent and the user to enter the code. And actually because of that, you can set your duration equal to 0 so that this immediately will time out. Verification failed. This is something we can set our return value to error. So we can set this to error, and then if this fails, we can basically display that same exact message there. So this is relatively simple. What will be returned from this is an auth exception, and it'll be an auth exception, and we can just call it the exception. Now this exception will have a message parameter on it that we could similarly use, but for now I'm just going to actually return the string error. And there are some different ways to do this that would be more sophisticated, but basically if our function here returns error, back here where we're calling it, I'm going to just test if this result value equals error. Then I'm also just going to display this warning message. So I'm not actually going to display the error that's returned. I'm just going to display that the phone number couldn't be validated. So it's kind of a simple way to do it for right now. Code sent, this is the this is the main part of it. This is like where we actually are going to send the code, and then what we're going to do once that code is sent. So again, the way this is going to work, the code is going to be texted to the phone number, and then you're going to need to enter that code to basically confirm that this phone number is your phone number. Or code sent is going to return a verification ID, and that verification ID is going to be essentially how Firebase Auth is going to know that this phone is the phone that that phone number is for. So it's going to be a string value, verification ID, and then we can add, this is kind of like the default setup of how this callback will work, but we're going to want the force resending token. So when the user enters their phone number and hits continue here, this code sent will be called once that text message is sent, and we want the user at that point to be able to enter that verification code that they got texted to them into here to confirm the validation of the Firebase Auth. And then at that point, we can use this verification ID and that code that they enter to create a credential, and then use that credential to authenticate the user. So this all kind of needs to happen in the view, and to get that pop-up to happen, or basically to get that pop-up to trigger when this code sent is triggered, we need to pass the build context into this so that we'll have the view context that we could link a new widget to. So all that to say, we're going to need to pass another parameter here, which is going to be the context, which is the build context. Now, this is a little bit confusing because it's so far abstracted from the view, but we do have access to the build context in this submit here, that submit function, because that is all called from the build. So this is the build function right here, and this context is the one that we're passing through. The reason it's available is because it basically gets passed through, so like through all those functions that we have. So anyway, we have the context. We're going to need to also add that here to, this will be a parameter of type build context, and then we'll call it the context. We're essentially going to use it for a dialog box to pop up here. So we can start with a show dialog, and that is going to require that context. So now within this dialog, we can actually do a few things. We can first off, we can make the dialog have a message that says enter the verification code that you were texted, and then we also can have a text field and a button that will allow the user to do all of that. First thing though, we want to make sure this dialog box cannot be disabled, or rather dismissed. So to do that, we can say barrier dismissible and set that to false. By default, a dialog box can be dismissed just by clicking outside of the dialog box, and that will prevent that. The dialog box takes a builder, and then this builder is also going to take a context, and that is going to, now we can choose what kind of dialog box, and this will be an alert dialog box. And then we can give it a title, and then we can also give it a content. So the content, we're going to set we just set it to a column, a simple column. In it, we're just going to have just a text field. So set that text field. The text field is going to be pretty simple for now. We're just going to need a controller for it so that we can eventually get the value that's in that text field. Just define a controller up right above this, and this can be we'll call this the code controller, because it'll store the code of that was texted to the user, and that just needs to be a text editing controller. So set that there, and that should be good. Okay, so after the content, we can have our action. It's going to be a flat button that will trigger it. And we can give our button a title, which is just going to be submit. And we can set the colors of this. We can set the text color to be white, and we can set the button color to be green. We now can have the on pressed action here. And this on pressed action is where we're actually going to confirm that we're going to use this verification ID that's returned from the code being sent. And the code sent, again, is what's sending that text message. And we're also going to be able to use the value in the code controller, which is going to be the verification ID that the user entered. And we're going to be able to get a credential from Firebase, and we're going to use that credential basically to sign the user in. So let's go ahead and create our credential here. So again, this credential is going to be what's used to actually sign the user in. And we can get this credential from the phone auth provider. From the phone auth provider, we're going to be calling get credential. And you can see that this takes two parameters. So it takes that verification ID, which again is right here. So we can pass that in to that. And then it's also going to take the SMS code, which is going to be the value of this text field. So if we format this a little bit, we can add that in here. And then we're going to just want to take the text of this. And then we're also going to call trim on it just to remove any white space, and a semicolon at the end there. So now we have this credential here, so we could use the credential to actually authenticate the user. So now we do have our instance of Firebase Auth, which is this instance right here. So we can call Firebase Auth dot. Now we can sign in with a credential, and then we can pass it this credential. And this is actually, we can do the callback of this, and the callback on this is basically going to return that auth result, and we can call that the result. Essentially, if this is successful, we'll be in here, and then if not, we can catch the error, and we can just set that error to E, and for now we can print out the error. But essentially, if this is successful, then we want to do what we would normally do in this function here. So you'll notice if any of these other ones are successful, we're basically handling all that logic within this function of the submit. But since we already basically passed the context and the view context into our auth service for this specific event, we can also just push the home view. So basically what this is saying is, if this is successful, then redirect to the home view, because we do have a user signed in. And the error here is actually, this needs to be down here, I believe, and a semicolon there. Oh, other way around. So like that. If you Command Option L on a Mac, it'll format this all for you. But yeah, that is it for that. The last thing, the code retrieval timeout, we can leave this as null as well. It was set to nil. You're going to need to change this so that it takes the verification ID, and for now we're just going to set the verification ID equal to the verification ID and then print that out. Lastly, we should actually add this verification complete here. And this is pretty simple. I don't think we're actually going to hit this, but if we do, we don't want it to just error out. We want it to actually log the user in. So we pretty much have that logic all going on in here with this button being clicked. But essentially, this is what that function will return, is that auth credential by default. So we don't need to do any of this stuff where we get the auth credential. Really, all we need to do is sign in with the credential and then push to the home page. So if we copy all of this and paste it right up here, we can just change credential with auth credential, and then basically this will work if we do ever hit that complete block there. Instead of printing the error here, let's return error as a string, and that will essentially do the same thing that we were doing here. And then also we can do that and return error here as well as a string, and that should just kind of cover all of our bases. If you rerun it on your simulator, it's actually not going to work. It's not going to work in the simulator ever, actually. So it doesn't matter what phone number you enter, the simulator will never send you that text message, because you need to be on an actual device. Now, there is one thing we forgot to do, which is in Firebase itself, we need to enable phone authentication. So if you go to authentication here, if you go to the sign-in methods and go to phone, you need to mark this as enabled and then save it. You're also going to need to make sure that you have the SHA-1 signing certificate for Google, for Android rather, and I'll link to how you do that below. It's pretty simple. But now you should be good. What you need to do to test this then is basically sync it to an actual device. So I will sync it to my phone, and then I will from there show you what it looks like. All right, while trying to run this, the app kept crashing when I was hitting continue. I tried doing a few debugs and a few things I changed. Putting this as async, I think, is a good way to go since this is a future function. Not much else has changed. I think everything else can stay pretty much the same. One thing you'll notice, if you do run this from Xcode itself, you'll see there's this error here with a uncaught exception. Basically, this URL, this custom URL is our Firebase URL, and that needs to be added into our URL type. So if you go into, this is again an Xcode, if you go to the info tab, normally if you go to targets here and then click on info and then scroll down, URL types, we already have one should have already been set from before, but it seems like this has changed for some reason. So add that one in here and then try running it again, and that should prevent the app from crashing as it has been for me these past few times to run. So running it on the device again now. All right, so after adding that URL to Xcode, we're on our physical device here, and hopefully this time it doesn't crash. If we click sign in, you notice the sign in with Apple button isn't here, and it actually should be because this is an iPhone. At the very end of this video, I'll show you how to fix that. But click sign in with phone here, and now I will enter the phone for this device and hit continue. And now you'll notice it is working, which is good. It didn't crash. So it verifies that, and then you'll see we do get our text message here. And if we click on it, you'll see this is the message here. I was doing some testing before, but this is our verification code. So we can copy this and paste it in here. You'll see it does come from the message, and hit submit. And there you go, we're logged in. If we log out and we can sign back in with that phone number, you notice if we just hit continue here, we do get that error as we would expect. So if we hit continue, it'll verify we're not a robot. If you try doing this a few times, it's going to do some reCAPTCHA there just to make sure you're not a robot. So you'll notice the message came in right there again, and if we click here, we'll be able to log in. Now you'll notice that this dialog box is taking up the entire height of the screen. That's, I don't know, it's not a huge deal. It's not really necessary though, so we could change that real quick, and but essentially this would let us log back in. So to fix that dialog box's height, if we just go to where the column is here, and above the child, do the main axis size, and then just set that to main axis size dot min. It won't take up the whole height of our screen anymore, and instead it will just be the minimum size that's required to fit that box. All right, so for our sign in with Apple button, it wasn't showing up on our actual device, and that is because of the way we're checking to see if we should be showing it. Right here you can see we're just seeing if the version is greater than 13. Now this is going to fail because we're not on version we're on version like 13.6 or something. I don't know the exact version, but it's no longer a solid 13. So this is actually a very brittle way to do this, and we're going to change that real quick. All right, so we're actually going to remove everything in this function except the set state, and we're going to set that state a little bit differently. So if there's actually with this with this plugin, the Apple plugin that we have, which is called Apple SignIn, there's a method we can call on it that's called isAvailable, and this is actually going to give us that value that we want. Now this is an asynchronous function, so we are going to have to await for it, so we're going to set this to a variable called isAvailable and await that, and then we can use this isAvailable here and it will return true or false, so we could set the state to that value there. This is much cleaner. It's using part of the package that we already have, import, and this should work on our phone. So there's these two packages that we were using to check the device's state. We can just remove, or the devices, whether it was iPhone or Android, we can remove those because they're no longer needed. Now if we run this again on our device, that Apple sign-in button should be there. And yes, running the app on my actual device, there you go. I have a screenshot of it there. Now that sign in with Apple button is displaying as we would expect. Great, so that's going to be it for this video. Now we do have phone auth set up, so that's another way that a user can log into the app. This video was made really because a lot of people requested that phone auth was covered. So if there are other topics that you'd like to see covered, go ahead and comment those down below. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing and liking this video. All right, that's going to be it. Ciao for now.